Hi everyone, it's time to read another chapter from our book Toys, and this chapter is about wind-up toys and automations. Let's listen in and find out more about this special toy. What makes wind-up toys work? Turning a key tightens a spring inside the toy. As the spring unwinds, it turns gears, which move the toy's parts. Take a look at the picture of the inside of a wind-up toy. It shows the gears and the turning key. Today's wind-up toys are for children, and most of them are relatively simple. Originally, wind-up toys were for adults, usually royalty, and often were extremely complicated and expensive. Rather than wind-up toys, they were called automations, and usually featured people, animals, or vehicles of some kind. With the finest craftsmanship, automations moved by means of elaborate internal clockwork devices. Their exterior was formed and decorated by hand, in many cases with the utmost skill and attention to detail. In the late 1400s, a German inventor by the name of Karl Grad was often invited to the royal banquets. Sitting at the table, Grad would open his hand and release a metal fly that buzzed across the room, circled the long dining table, and then returned to the rest on his maker's hand. A few years later, Grad created a life-size mechanical eagle that could fly around town and then return to its original spot. In 1509, the famous artist and inventor Leonardo da Vinci constructed a mechanical lion to welcome Louis XII to Italy. When the French king was seated on his throne, Leonardo placed the animal on the floor at the opposite end of a great hall. As spectators stared in amazement, the clockwork lion moved slowly towards the king. It stopped in front of him, and as if in tribute to the king, tore open its chest with the claws. An even more incredible story is told about René Descartes, a renowned French philosopher and scientist of the 1600s. Descartes believed that all living creatures, including people, are basically just higher developed machines. To demonstrate this, he constructed a life-size mechanical girl. Shortly after completing the automation, whom he called Francina, he took her on a sea voyage. By accident, the captain of the ship set her in motion. Terrified by her sudden movement, the captain ran. The robotic Francina kept coming toward him. In a panic, the captain grabbed the automation and threw it overboard. Perhaps the most fantastic mechanical figures of all time were created by Jean-Pierre Drawes, a Swiss watchmaker, and by his son Henri Louis. One of those made by Jean-Pierre, called The Writer, was a full-size likeness of a young boy seated at a desk. When put into motion, the clockwork child dipped his pen into a bottle of ink, shook off the surplus with a flick of a wrist, and then proceeded to write clear and correct sentences. As each line was completed, the hand holding the pen moved to the beginning of the next line. Superior to The Writer was the designer and automation created by Jean-Pierre's son Henri Louis. Like an artist studying his model, the automation paused from time to time as he sketched, examined his work, corrected errors, and even blew the eraser dust from the paper. On one occasion, the designer was seated before King Louis XVI of France. After working for some time, the automation put down his pencil and gestured with his hand to his work, a portrait of the French king. Later, when Henri Louis gave a demonstration in England, his automation drew portraits of the English monarch and other royalty. Henri Louis died at his height of fame in 1790. With him, the art of making automations declined. Though a few choice pieces were created after this time by other artists, the quality of the work went steadily downhill. More and more, the toys were made by machines rather than by hand, and they became generally much simpler and cheaper. By the 19th century, they were made of tin or plastic and mass-produced in large numbers. Today, wind-up cars, tractors, trains, spaceships, and robots roll off assembly lines by the thousands. Many of them are clever and fun to play with, but the era of automations is over. Will this specialized art form return? What do you think? I think that we'd have to have some very inventive people who have great imaginations and who are probably artists of some kind. So let's listen in on some interesting facts. Before the Christian era, the Greeks and Arabs made mechanical toys powered by air, water, or mercury. Makers of early wind-up toys were sometimes accused of sorcery because their creations seemed so miraculous. King Louis XIV, Napoleon, and Queen Victoria all collected wind-up toys. Empress Josephine of France, wife of Napoleon, loved giving automations to children, especially the poor. So I hope you liked our story in our book, Toys. And our next story next week will be hobby horses. See you all again next time. Bye-bye.